Alrighty, guys. Well, I've said it so many times already, but we are in the post-Superman era of life, of the Access Blockbusters Pod in particular. But what that means is that we have things to talk about now with Superman. Now, this segment in particular is not going to dive into any of the specifics in the story or the film itself of Superman. Rather, we are here to talk today about box office, which I don't always talk about box office, but I think when it pertains to interesting films, interesting trends, and whatnot, I think it's really, it's fun to talk about it. And, with a film like Superman, launching a cinematic universe, financial dominance or financial success was not necessarily, I think, the be-all, end-all of whether this film was considered a success. I really do think, much in the same way how Thunderbolts really underperformed, but I still think was considered a success within Marvel, so much so that they tapped Jake Schreier, the director of Thunderbolts, to be the director of their X-Men film, which arguably is their most important film in a long time, maybe since Spider-Man Homecoming, maybe since Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame. The X-Men film is very important, and they tapped Jake Schreier because he did a great job with Thunderbolts. So, in a similar way, while Thunderbolts underperformed, I still think it was a success within Marvel. And I think that Superman, similarly, could have been seen the same way if it had not really performed up to box office expectations, but still had the same critical reaction. But we now, and I understand that when this segment is coming out, it's been over a week since the first weekend, so it's been about it's been about a week and a half, I guess, since the first weekend of Superman. But still, we're here to talk about what the first weekend can tell us, the first box office weekend can tell us about the trajectory of the film, and really the question that doesn't necessarily matter, because if this film makes $999 million but doesn't make $1 billion, I don't think it makes a difference at all. But the question that seems to be on everyone's mind lately with box office success, can Superman make $1 billion? Again, if it makes $900 million, I think it's just as successful as if it made $1 billion. Really. But anyways, let's talk about the first weekend's box office. So Superman came in with its first weekend at $122 million domestically, which is very, very big. Now, for context, though, first of all, it's beating up basically every other superhero movie in the year, and I think Deadpool and Wolverine made more than that, but still, and Deadpool and Wolverine made over $1 billion, but it's a very big number. It's important to point out, though, that this number is not even close to the top of the superhero box office draws. You have films like, obviously, a lot of the Avengers films have all made well over that. Those films were in the $200 million range. Black Panther was in the $200 million range. Other films like Civil War, for example, were as well, and Spider-Man No Way Home. So Superman debuting at $122 million is a very, very, let's make no mistake about it, is a very, very good result. And so much so that James Gunn, Peter Safran, and David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner Brothers, have come out and celebrated this, as they should. It is a very, very robust number, especially given the fact that, for example, comparing the Avengers films, those were coming off of massive momentum, huge films, and people were so excited for them that, yes, of course, they were going to make super ridiculous amounts of money. I think Avengers Endgame had an opening weekend of like $300 million, which is unbelievably insane. So Superman coming in at $122 million, given the fact that people had reservations about the DC brand just based on the DCEU, and we were launching a new cinematic universe, and I think James Gunn's, I don't know if any of the Guardians films have made over $122 million, but none of them have made $1 billion. I don't believe. No, none of them have made $1 billion. And so this is, there are a lot of things working against the fact that this is not going to have the same kind of ceiling as an Avengers film, for example. But again, a very good result. It's also important to compare this, though, to other DC films in particular, though we will discuss how this might differ from some of the other DC films. So looking at a couple statistics here, comparing it to Batman v Superman, Batman v Superman had an opening weekend of $166 million, so over $40 million more than Superman. The Dark Knight opened to $160 million. And again, this is not adjusted for inflation, so this was many years ago at this point, almost 10 years ago for Batman v Superman. Crazy. Actually, yeah, no, almost 10 years ago. And The Dark Knight coming out about 15 years ago. And actually, now I'm looking at these numbers. The Dark Knight Rises, made $160 million. And The Dark Knight made $158.4 million. The Batman, which came out a couple years ago, and actually is an interesting comparison, made $134 million, so made a little more than Superman did here. What's interesting to note about these films, though, is let's look at where these films topped out at. So, first of all, The Batman came out in 2022, made $134 million, and capped out at about $700 million. Importantly, what's important to note is that this film was still coming out at the tail end of the pandemic. This film was beloved. The Batman was beloved, just as the Superman film is beloved. But it came out at the tail end of the pandemic, and so while this $134 million number is higher than the opening weekend of Superman, which I think was just because people were excited to see the Batman. I think that it capped out at about $700 million because A, it was introducing a new iteration of Batman, and B, I think that the people who really wanted to go see this movie in theaters, right, who felt like it was safe and wanted to go, went opening weekend and the next weekend and probably didn't. I feel like people who were going to stay home because of safety concerns, because they weren't ready to go back to theaters, didn't really come after that. So this film topped out at $700 million. If the Batman came out, everything else being equal, in 2019, could it have made $1 billion? I still don't think so, but maybe it comes in $850 million as well. The Dark Knight Rises, I believe The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises both made $1 billion. I think. I could be wrong. I know that The Dark Knight made $1 billion. And those films started out at 158.4 and $160 million. So again, they had a big head start with in comparison to Superman. Because even tens of millions of dollars in this case makes a difference in terms of the head start that these films have to $1 billion. And then Batman v Superman opened the biggest of all of these Batman comparison films. I don't know why we're just comparing Batman films, but I guess these are the more recent films to compare it to with similar numbers. I think The Man of Steel made something like $116 million opening weekend. And so not Man of Steel, Superman made more than Man of Steel did opening weekend, which is important to note as well. But again, looking at Batman v Superman, it made $166 million opening weekend, but capped out at $800 million worldwide. Now, the difference between Batman v Superman and this Superman film is that Batman v Superman was not well received, and so people probably didn't go back as many times in theaters as they would have for maybe the Superman film. So here's what Superman has working for it. Number one, it has positive momentum. People want to go see this movie, right? And internationally, by the way, it generated, I think, $95 million. And so it is at about $217 million as of the close of the opening weekend for Superman. $217 million. That's a big head start. And it hasn't opened in all global markets, just as most films in the United States don't open in all global markets at the same time. So it is at a very big number. $217 million is a big number, right? It's a huge head start. That being said, is that enough to get it to $1 billion when films like Black Panther open $200 million domestically, for example, and clear the $1 billion mark? I don't think so. Because look, Batman v Superman makes $166 million. That is enough of a head start to get it to $1 billion if the film was received well, and it wasn't, right? And so it tops out at $800 million. This Superman film doesn't have that problem. People seem to generally really enjoy this film. And what I think is different about the Superman film as well is that it has repeat value for not just adults, but for kids. This Superman film is, I think, pretty much appropriate for all ages. It's a 4-quadrant movie, and it's coming out in the dead middle of summer. Batman v Superman came out in March. And so I think that this film has a lot of things going for it. That being said, though, $122 million and $200 million worldwide as a debut, while really strong numbers, and Superman should be, the people making Superman, Warner Brothers, should be celebrating this, I do not think has the ceiling of $1 billion at this point in time, unless it has insane legs heading into the next few weeks. And we remember, Fantastic Four First Steps is coming out in 2 weeks, so we'll have to see how those numbers affect Superman. But I do think that this film has a cap. I think that this film will cap out at a maximum of probably $800 million is my guess. And that is with really big momentum, continuing word of mouth, and people going to see this film. Realistically, I think this film can make about $650 to $700 million, which is, I think, right around where my updated predictions were when we did our updated box office predictions for the rest of 2025 a couple months ago. And I think that I said Superman could make $700 million, and I still think that it can. I think, though, that is probably around where we're going to tap out. Like, the most likely outcome, in my opinion, is in that $600 to $700 million range, which, by the way, for a first film in the DCEU, with new actors, new characters, new universe, new everything, with the negative momentum that the DCEU is giving it, is a really good number. So you should not take this, for me, answering the question of, is Superman going to make $1 billion? In my opinion, no, I don't think it has a very good chance of doing that. Should not take that as a negative comment. I think Superman making $700 million, or even $600 million, or even $500 million, based on this word of mouth, is a huge win for DC. So I think for now, I'm going to stick with my predictions of between $650 and $700 million, and I think that is something that DC should be very, very proud of. So we will see, based on the trends, and we'll probably do an update as Superman closes out, its box office run, but still a very encouraging start for Superman. Guys, what do you think of these initial first weekend box office numbers for Superman? Do you think still, after a $122 million domestic opening weekend and a $217 worldwide 217 million worldwide opening that Superman can hit $1 billion. Still, let me know in the comments down below.